Imagine if that happened, though. Hello, my fellow hunters. Welcome one and all as we talk more delicious Sunbreak and imagine what could be, what is likely to exist, what isn't going to happen, but could. What would surprise us like a salmon? Like a salmon? Salmon? Salmon! I guess, ironically, that probably was quite a surprising salmon. In any case, then, I want to talk about, well, Espinas. So, Espinas, of course, is a Monster Hunter Frontier original monster, and indeed, it's the Rathalos of that series. It is the flagshipest of all of the flagships there, and it is the Frontier monster if you had to pick a single one. But why pick a single Frontier monster at all? Well, obviously, with me being more and more familiar recently with the game, there are a lot of incredibly strong and solid concepts that really should, if I'm honest, get re-explored. And in fact, a lot of the coolest concepts in current modern day Monster Hunter had a sort of proto-rudimentary kind of version in Frontier before it got, redeveloped and made into something very, very cool in a modern Monster Hunter title. So why not do that again in Sunbreak? But why Sunbreak of all things? Couldn't you just make this argument for any given single Monster Hunter game? Well, firstly, yeah, I mean, you can. But secondly, I think Sunbreak is especially a good choice for it. And I'll tell you for why. I mean, obviously, I'm going to tell you for why. That's the whole point of this video. Because it fits. Bottom line, it really does fit. Espinas, then, is, well, one, a flying wyvern, right? He is classically dragony, and for a medievally type setting, that's obviously a good thing. I guess one thing that we kind of just take for granted when we know that we're getting kind of mythical monsters of that western medievally type era is one of the big ones is the dragon, but that feels kind of, duh, it's Monster Hunter, obviously we're going to get we don't need to worry about that, but a dragony dragon is something that's definitely worth looking at. Now, of course, Espinas isn't the most dragony dragon looking, but he does have the most classic, I think, of dragon colors, which is green. You could argue red if you're more of a D&D fantasy background, but I think in most folk tales and fairy tales and legends, green is quite the dragony color. But more than anything then, outside of a new flying wyvern, of course, both being expected and perfect, but that's something, again, you can say for most Monster Hunter games, he is a rose. And as we know, a rose by any other name is just as sleep. Like sleep, not sweet, because he starts the fight asleep. Yeah, I know. A quick little rundown then on Espinas, and if you do like these little theory fun times videos, please, it really does help us out. Subscribe, bell the bell so you don't miss more in future, and if you'd like to see us stick around, keep going, keep making stuff for you guys, which is our honor and pleasure to do, please consider supporting us on Patreon down below. No matter how much it means the world. Seriously, thank you. Espinas, then, is a very curious monster. He is both poison and paralysis. Indeed, he has a fireball that when it hits you, both poisons and paralyzes you. And, more than anything, he, starts the fight completely asleep. He is so armored and hard to damage and defensively strong with his poison thorns that he beat a Kushala Da'ora for dominion over the Great Forest, earning himself the title Lord of the Great Forest. And that is quite impressive in itself. He's just that hard to damage, and he knows it, and he's so confident in it that basically he just lies there asleep, things bump into him, accidentally die, and then he wakes up and has lunch. And when you first attack him, he will just sleep and ignore you, assuming that like all the rest, you won't be able to do anything. Eventually, you'll wake him up, he'll just kind of, oh, that tickles, what are you doing? Oh, stop it, and kind of sleepily ignore you, wander around, and finally, once you convince him you're a threat, he will enrage, blood rushing to his plates, making him softer, but so much faster, more powerful, and deadly. It's a really cool little concept, and something that I would love to see brought back, just because of all the crazy things we could do with a monster that starts asleep in modern Monster Hunter. But in any case, that's Espinas, and of course, he is modeled largely, or at least has has very significant comparisons to a rose. He's very flowery in nature. He's got the green, the stem, the red from, well, the classic red rose, but also the thorns, right? The thorns of a rose that, well, for his case, deliver the poison. And that's very, very interesting because roses, flowers, that kind of setup, and indeed specifically roses, are about as medieval symbolism as you can get. They are on crests, they are on shields, they are emblems, they are house sigils, they are emblazoned across so much imagery from the eras that Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak is drawing inspiration to. Even just looking at Rondine and Miss
Royal Matter
armor and emblems that they have on the ship, and you just kind of get that proper castle led by Lord and Lady of the House, and this is their crest, respected and long may it reign type deal, and a rose is a big one. In fact, historically speaking, the War of the Roses is one of the best examples of that. In England, you had the forces of Lancashire, the Red Rose, go against the forces of Yorkshire, the White Rose, for control. And that was one hell of a conflict, and indeed that War of the Roses is one of the largest single inspirations for Game of Thrones, as said by Mr. R.R. himself. So that's quite neat to know. It really does have echoes through history. So the idea of having such a strong, rosy symbolism from medieval period tied to a monster that most symbolizes that rose type aesthetic is a really neat idea in my mind. Oh, and by the way, in case you're wondering how the War of the Roses ended, and by the way, the War of the Roses gave us the mnemonic Richard of York gave battle in vain to remember the rainbow colours. Richard of York, red, orange, yellow. That's kind of cool too. I really do like the War of the Roses. The part I don't like though is the ending, because technically speaking, the leader of the Yorkists, and bear in mind I am originally from Yorkshire, so I am all about that white rose, was killed by the forces of the Lancashire side, and thus Henry was declared King Henry, Henry being the leader. He then, well, married Elizabeth of York to bring the two sides back together, and thus we got the Tudor Rose and the start of the Tudor dynasty, so I suppose all's well that ends well, but yeah, there you have it. In any case, I really just like that concept. And yeah, this is a tenuous thread, right? It's basically, okay, the setting that we're having for Sunbreak would be the kind of setting where we get a lot of flowery rose-like imagery and symbolism. This is the monster that best represents flowery symbols and rose-like aesthetic in Espinas. Espinas is very cool, he would work. That would be awesome to see the Frontier Flagship go across, but again, it would be. And it is the Frontier Flagship. If you're going to do any of the monsters, I mean, start with the main one. It does go a little bit further than that, though, because of course Frontier shut down, which means the developers are obviously now moved on working on other projects. But what's to say that the minds behind Frontier and its monsters haven't moved just into the Monster Hunter teams? This kind of concept that there's a main series team and a portable team is a little bit archaic. They go back and forth a lot. We've seen that even just between Iceborne and Rise. So, I could totally see a world in which someone like Teruki Miyashita, I really apologize if I've probably likely butchered that name, who is a very important director of Frontier, would have moved into maybe more mainline Monster Hunter. And indeed, he has said in an interview he would love a way for the monsters in Frontier to make a reappearance in the main series. And that's kind of, ooh. And, well, the idea that he's part of Sunbreak isn't exactly the craziest idea in the world. So, yeah, I think it's an interesting little food for thought. It's nothing too ridiculous, but there is enough there for me to at least raise it as a fun little discussion and just put out there the wouldn't it be cool if, when it comes to an Espinas rising in the forests of Elgado. And that's something that I think would be very cool to see. It really is the perfect starter monster to really introduce some of the Frontier concepts. Though that said, concept-wise, I don't think, if I'm being honest, they ever will one for one just literally put a Frontier monster into main series, like straight up just rip it and there it goes, but I do think we could say, oh, it's a different monster that starts asleep and has poison and paralysis and kind of looks like a flower. I mean, I think that is entirely possible and perhaps even likely that we get something more nature-based when it comes to Sunbreak, again, just because of how tied that is to the symbolism of a lot of what in real life Sunbreak is borrowing from as its theme. So maybe a literal one for an Espinas, but a monster kind of rose-like, or, you know, something along those lines to match the symbols, because imagine if Sunbreak did had loads of houses of knights, and obviously there's the king and the queen, but there'll be lords and ladies, right? And imagine if each of them had a house symbol that was based on a monster in Sunbreak, a new monster. So like one of the houses has something vaguely wolfy, and they like the Lunagaron, and so on and so forth. I think that could be really quite cool, but I indeed will cool it there, and until, well, next time, I would love to know your thoughts on, well, my thoughts. Like if you enjoyed this, subscribe for more, please consider supporting the future channel on Patreon down below, and until we meet again, a good boy.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.